I use Melodyne. I'm just gonna show you a very quick thing that I would do with Melodyne. So I've got that. Oh, there it is. Yeah. Okay. See, it's one I made earlier. So I've already analyzed this into Melodyne. Melodyne looks like this. I just want to quickly cover just a few basics in Melodyne. First thing I've done, analyze. Why is that not adjusting? I don't know why sometimes the shortcuts work, sometimes they don't with Melodyne. Sorry, I'm mumbling. So I've just analyzed this vocal into Melodyne. First thing that I do before I put any kind of tuning or modulation correction on is you can see here, look, this very first note, like vocals tend to slide to notes. You don't just hit a note straight on. It's always gliding up and gliding down. You can see here that Melodyne doesn't recognize it as two notes. It has like this pitch, this line is kind of like the pitch center. But what would happen is if I tried tuning and flattening out maybe some of the wobbliness of this vocal, it would bring this lower note that it slid from up into this note here. So the first thing I do once I've analyzed it into Melodyne is I go chopping all the notes that it hasn't recognized properly, all the little slides and glides, because I want them to be where they're supposed to be, and I don't want to put the tuning on and then start flattening out those little curves. So you can see here, I just go through the project doing all that. And that's quite an important thing, because if you don't do that and then you tune it, it can sound more tuned than it needs to be if you haven't kind of worked with those glides properly. So if you want things to sound a bit more natural, and you can, sorry. Yeah, so I'll just do that as an example. I'm not going to do the whole thing because we'll be here all day. And then I would just select, so you've got pitch center and pitch drift. The drift is kind of, say you've got what's a good example of it there? Pitch center is just moving these blobs to the right notes. The drift is, say the note glided off the pitch a little, it would flatten that part that went down to be more centered. I just can't find a good example of it here. Like there, maybe it overshot a bit there on the start of that note, and then kind of found its center. So the drift will just flatten out that bit there to be more centered, even though I could just put the whole thing on the right note now. It's still got that little sharpness to it when it kicks in. So the drift will just even that out a bit more. So I just select the whole thing. I mean, I usually just put the pitch, the correction to about 90 something. Like, it depends on how artificial you want it to sound. And the drift I usually check all the way out because I don't want things drifting off. But it doesn't mean that it is, even if I put it to 100%, it doesn't mean that it is in tune, because then you have to go through manually each note and make sure it's actually in the right place it's supposed to be. Because for one, it might have tuned the note to the wrong place. And for two, you might see the red blob is on the note, but the line is still overshooting or it's not quite there. So you need to have a listen. And even though I've set it to 100% tuning, that line still might not be on 100%. So you have to manually kind of just, you might go, ooh, it would just overshot a little bit there. So I'm just going to drag that down manually by ear. So that's what I would do next. I would just tune it all, cut all those glides, put a blanket kind of tune on like 90 something percent. And then I'd go through and I'd have to listen to everything, make sure it's in the right place.
Tell them you'll skip plans tonight.
This client, she's very good. Like, she's very good. Her pitch is generally, like, it generally when I hit tune, it's there. But some people, if they've sang a little bit too sharp or a little bit too flat, they'll be on the wrong note, so they'll be worse out of tune in a way.
They don't need to know this.
Do we have an example?
Walk fast and keep your head down. They won't even know.
There we go. The they then was off. Sounded off anyway.
Walk fast and keep your head down.
There. It's supposed to be they.
Walk fast and keep your head down. They won't even.
So yeah, that tune, that's one note too flat, too sharp. So just got to go through. Obviously, it depends on your experience with listening to pitch and how comfortable you are with that. But you do it enough times, and you'll start to notice things jump out. And the other thing that you just then want to check is you can see here the orange line between the notes. The orange line is kind of, let me zoom in a bit more. The orange line is what Melodyne is doing for that glide, and the darker line is where it was originally. So what it's doing is it's making that glide faster than it is. So it just might sometimes give you a more artificial glide than you want. And sometimes people will, the feedback might be, oh, it just sounds a little bit auto-tuned. People often say they don't know the difference. But you just might want to go through and just soften these glides off a little bit as well if they don't sound very natural. So just check the naturalness of what Melodyne has done. And yeah, it's a long process, but you have to go through, listen to every line by ear, make those adjustments, and then you've got your tuned vocal. You've got all these different tools in Melodyne to do different things. This is just the basic one, the standard one. So when you select it, it comes up with a different icon, and you just move it. You can see like that, I'm changing the speed of the glide like that. Can you see that? So that's a slower glide now, be more natural. That would be super sharp. Where is that, 37?
But I don't mind dancing, and I know I've never.
If I, just to show you an example actually, just select the whole thing and I'll make it really rigid.
Notice, 'cause and I know I've never been one to dance in a storm.
Like, it's not super obvious, but it is much more, just straight to the notes, and it doesn't sound as natural as if I did the opposite way.
Never been one to dance in a storm.
Much more natural. Okay, so let's assume I've Melodyne that. I've got the track, the vocal happy with. Oh, the other thing what I do with Melodyne as well is sometimes you can find that certain phrases, the whole thing might be a bit out of time. It might be a little bit too quick, a little bit too late. But then you can also just get a phrase that's perfectly in time, except for maybe 2 little lines of it. In which case, I use Melodyne to time correct as well. So you have the time correction tool here. And so I would just manually might just kind of make little adjustments like this. And it just takes play. You just have to play with it until you get it right by ear. Sometimes you don't quite know which way it is. But I do, yeah, pitch correction and time correction in Melodyne to get it where I want it to be. And I know it could come across as maybe being a bit, oh, why are you making it so artificial, so perfect? And it's not that I want it to be so artificial perfect. It's that I don't want to be drawn to something that doesn't sound right, rather than I want it to sound perfect. So anything that I feel like, oh, it's catching my attention in the wrong ways, that's what I want to fix. Because of the time it takes to do Melodyne, I'll often do the leads with Melodyne, make sure they're spot on. When it comes to layers of harmonies and stuff, I'll use Logic's built-in one, which is just quicker. First thing, you have to real-time analyze the vocal into Melodyne. So you have to, like, if I put it on there, if I want this to be in Melodyne, I have to click this transfer button, then play the song and wait for it to finish until it's in Melodyne. There is a version of Melodyne called Melodyne ARA, where it just grabs it straight into it. But I did it once. I did like a 3-hour Melodyne session, closed the project, opened it again, and the whole thing was gone. So I was like, I'm never using that again. It could be something that's fixed now, but I just still haven't. I don't want to risk it. I haven't had the opportunity to try it out. So whereas obviously Logic's flex pitch, you just analyze it straight in. You've got the notes right there. It's quick. You can easily just select it all, put the pitch to 90 or 100 or whatever. And with backing vocals, these kind of little artifacts that maybe sound a bit too artificial, things like that, you're not going to notice them when you lay them all up and things. So yeah, I'll often do backing vocals and harmonies and things on the Melodyne flex pitch, on the Logic flex pitch, just to save time, and it's unnecessary to go into that much detail with them. Another thing I never used to do, so I've got Melodyne, I've got it all analysed in Melodyne. The thing is now it's in Melodyne, whatever I do here now to the region, doesn't matter. Say I cut that line out, it's still there because it's playing from Melodyne now. So I can't do any editing in terms of cutting out all the silence and bits from this track until I've bounced it out in place from Melodyne. I used to do it the other way around, where I used to do all the cutting, then put it into Melodyne, and then keep it in Melodyne. But then you've got another issue then. If your client wants arrangement changes, oh, can we just shorten that verse, cut it in half? It's printed on Melodyne, unless you go into Melodyne and move all the stuff in Melodyne along with all your track. So it just becomes a big fuss. So once I've Melodyned it, again, I keep it I might save a new project, keep that Melodyne project there that I can always return to, but I will just flatten it with Melodyne on it, then turn Melodyne off. So make sure, obviously, I'm going to bounce this in place now. If you've got other plugins on afterwards, you need to make sure you're not bouncing those in place, because you don't want to print, you'll be printing down this compression and reverb if I did that. So say you've got this massive plugin chain, you need to make sure everything's turned off. And now I just want the tune thing, so I'm going to bounce that in place. And there it is. And then what I might do, say I had all my plugins already on that channel, I might just move that up there. And then I would do this the other way around, turn Melodyne off and turn all my plugins back on. And I might just keep Melodyne there for if I need to return to it, or if I'm making sure I'm careful with my projects, just make sure it's labeled as the project where I Melodyned everything, and I can just turn it off, take it off there and return to it if I need to. It's quite difficult with, I think when you're dealing with digital, because you can always keep changing things forever, it's quite difficult just to commit to stuff, and that takes quite a while to just be brave enough with and go, yeah, I'm just going to commit to that. Do I have to make quick decisions when making the comp in the session? Yes. What I usually do, if I can, it depends if the client is happy for me, but what I usually want to do and push to do is I'll just put my headphones on, ask them to make a cup of tea, and I'll do my comp first and get it to where I want it, and then I'll present that to them. And is there anything that you like or you don't like? I find what happens if they realize they can sit in on the comp with you, you'll just spend 4 hours going over every single line, and they just want to hear every version. They want to double check, and you just spend so much time. So I can just listen 1, 2, 3. That's my favorite. 1, 2, 3. Go through a line, a phrase at a time, or maybe half a verse at a time. Those are my favorite bits. I make those decisions and move on. But then once I've done that comp, I'll then take the headphones off, play it back, present it to them, make sure they're happy with it before we move on. Or I might make my own suggestions about parts that maybe we could re-record again and do a bit better. It's a difficult one when you're producing something. You don't want to be too pushy, but you don't want to give too much. I don't want to say power, because it's not about power, but it's just about controlling the flow of things. And sometimes when people are new into the studio and they realize all the things you can do, they might just want to start doing them. Oh, can we cut up each word and drop in each word? And can I listen to everything? You just have to just make decisions, trust yourself, and then give them the kind of finished version and go, there, what do you think? Yes, that's great, move on.